Hello, welcome to this episode of Let's Talk Death. I'm Fran Solomon.
And I'm Andy McNeil.
And we're thrilled to be your hosts for these conversations. Let's Talk Death is brought to you by Heal Grief, a social support network creating community after someone has died. Everything we do is inspired by our core belief that no one should ever grieve alone.
Our goal with this program is to have a friendly chat with some amazing people so we can help normalize and educate our Heal Grief community. Our guest today is Dr. Brook Griese. Brook is a licensed clinical psychologist who has devoted her career to promoting resilience and growth in children and families who have experienced loss, trauma, and adversity. In 2002, Brook and her husband, Brian, co-founded Judi's House in memory of Brian's mother, who died when he was 12. Since that time, Judi's House has provided free care to more than 11,000 youth and caregivers, reaching many thousands more through the research and education initiatives of the JAG Institute. By disseminating resources like the Childhood Bereavement Estimation Model and offering training in a continuum of comprehensive grief care, the nonprofit is dedicated to elevating childhood bereavement as a public health priority and ensuring equitable access to support that prevents complications of unaddressed grief. Brook spearheaded the organization's research and trauma-informed programs and served as CEO before transitioning to her current role on the board of directors. She is co-author of Pathfinders, a 10-week group curriculum, and regularly publishes and presents nationally. So Brook, we are delighted to have you as a guest on our show.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Andy, you've always been one of my favorite people to talk about bereavement with, and Fran, it's just such a pleasure to meet you and have this conversation.
Thank you so much, and again, welcome. So I have to ask, for the past 2 decades, you have been providing care and support to bereaved families, as well as conducting important research hugely impacting childhood bereavement care in the U.S. Can you share about what brought you into this field and why you focused primarily on childhood grief?
Yes, I would love to. One of the things I love about our field of bereavement is that most of the stories that bring us to this work are love stories. So many people who have started grief centers and programs around the country do it out of love for someone that they have lost, someone important in their life. And mine is a love story as well with the field and with this issue, but it started not from a life-changing loss of my own. Certainly I've had losses in my life. I've lost cousins and friends and loved ones, but I haven't lost a core attachment figure in my life, a parent as a child or a sibling. I haven't lost a child. I'm grateful for that. But when I met my husband, Brian, who co-founded Judi's House with me, I was so deeply impacted by his loss and really wanted to understand more about how the death of his mother at the age of 12 changed his life and how we could help promote resilience in kids who had had that experience. At about the same age as Brian was when he lost his mom, I was growing up in a small rural town in Michigan and was the daughter of a psychiatric nurse and the director of social services in a community that faced quite a bit of adversity and had very few resources and behavioral health supports and access to care. And so at a really young age, when I saw a friend have her life changed by a psychologist, I decided at 11 that I wanted to become a child psychologist. And I set myself on that course and came to Colorado and studied at CU Boulder and really always focused on those adverse childhood experiences of trauma and loss and other experiences that had the potential to disrupt development, and really wanted to understand how to promote resilience again and growth. So when I met my husband, as the story goes, it was at his first football game as a rookie in the NFL. It was my first football game that I'd ever paid attention to, quite frankly, and first one I'd attended in the NFL. But when we met, my life changed course. I was definitely on track to become an academic, to focus solely on research and clinical practice. I didn't realize that on our first date, when we had a conversation about what we wanted to do with our lives and what we would do for children if we had an opportunity, that we were planting seeds for what within a year would become Judi's house. And what we saw when we did research in the area of our community and went around the country, went to the Dougie Center, we went all over the country kind of looking to see what resources and services were available for kids who had had a loved one die, like Brian. We were struck by how few services there were, how very little research had been done, how little training the workforce receives. I think and I had a great clinical training, 6 years of PhD studies, but I really believe I only had about a 2-hour guest lecture on grief and loss during that entire time, which is not okay. And so knowing and seeing that this was an opportunity to change the lives and really support families in a more holistic way, we started Judi's House in 2002 and have grown over the years to provide that comprehensive grief care model that we feel embraces and is inclusive of all those in need of support.
Brooke, could you, I'm probably, Fran, I'm maybe going to ask the same question, but you do have a very specific model that you've developed over the years. It is research-based, and I certainly want you to talk about some of your research before we get done with the conversation. But could you talk about your approach, what your approach is, what are the elements of that, and why is that important?
Sure. Back to that, again, I was a nerd, so I just kind of went and did as much research as I possibly could on the issue of bereavement, and what was working in the community was most important to me. And there was just such a paucity of research on community-based services. But what we did see and feel, and I have to say that the very first time that Brian and I sat in a circle of kids who had experienced loss, we were visiting another program. When we went around the room and every kid in the group, they were probably 8 and 9-year-olds, and he was this big strapping football player. But when they went around the room and said their name and who died and how old they were, and then when it got to Brian and he said, "I'm Brian, I'm 27, and I lost my mom to cancer when I was 12. The change in his eyes, I really felt there was just a profound change in the way he looked at himself. And honestly, that he no longer felt alone. These were kids. He was an adult, but he never had that opportunity as a child to connect with other peers, other kids who had gone through a loss of this magnitude. He felt like he was the only 12-year-old who had lost his mom. And as a stoic, all-male family at that point, because they went from a family of 5 when they lost their mom to a family of 2 living in the home because his brothers were off at college, he felt very alone. And so that to both of us, and really seeing the power of peer support throughout our country and these programs shaped our programs. We started as a peer support program. And then as we opened our doors and as we saw who was coming through our doors, and I did implement research really early on in our development because I knew we needed to better understand the specific needs of who was coming through our doors, we saw that there were so many who had complications of grief, is what I would call them, whether it looked like trauma symptoms or reactions to the circumstance of the death or the complexity of the relationship with the person who died or suicidality, other complications that warranted additional support and intervention. That was when we felt the need really for our population of who was coming through our doors to integrate evidence-based practice and a really thorough assessment of their needs and really tailor services to their needs. So we have our groups, which are able to serve a whole continuum of grief reactions. It's important to us in a whole family model that we aren't only seeing people who are at the very far end of severity, if you will, of the intensity of their grief reactions. We don't believe that somebody should be singled out as quote unquote an identified patient in order to receive care. We don't believe that. We believe that everyone who wants and feels they need support should have access to it. And so our model, while very much based in research and very much evidence informed, does not exclude people who have too little or too much grief reactions going on for them. And that allows us to serve the whole family and to get them on the same page. So they're broken out into age-appropriate groups from 3 to 25, English and Spanish, and by type of death loss. In Colorado, we have an epidemic around youth suicide in particular, but suicides in general. So we have groups that are devoted solely to families and even parents who have all lost a child to suicide. So we're able to put them together with people who have experienced similar losses, much like grief centers around the country, but really tailor the services in an individualized way in our group model, which draws a lot on narrative work and cognitive behavioral approaches, but with that strong core of peer support and collective wisdom from the group really being key to the healing that we see in those groups. And then we offer individual and family therapy as well for those with more intense needs. We do a lot of education of the community that surrounds folks. It's really a whole community approach to make sure when they go to school, they have school-based groups that we lead there as well, but that their teachers and their counselors are also informed and able to support them more wholly and more fully in their grief.
Wow. Very impressive. I do want to go back and touch on something that you said when your husband was in that room with those young teens, and he felt so connected. You know, so often we hear from, or we here at AMF feel or hear that, you know, that emotion of grief kind of brings you right back to that moment in time, as if you were that age.
Mm-hmm.
Can you touch a little more on that? Has there been any research done in that throwback in time to that actual age where the death occurred?
I think that's a really interesting question, Fran. I know that, you know, for Brian and I, when we look at our children who are now about that age, and when we both reached the age that Judi, his mom, was when she died, it was salient for us. And I hear that from a lot of people who have lost someone. For some, yes, I think they talk about feeling kind of, you know, I don't want to use the word stuck, but there are
brought back
experiences that they weren't able to really fully go towards at that age. So maybe they weren't able to individuate from their parent, which you would normally do as a teenager, right? You would rebel and you would individuate, but if they have died, then you're not able to do that. And so there's some work that sometimes needs to be done around what did I miss? What weren't I able to do that I'm feeling now? Or what fears are in the way for me now as I'm hitting this age that my loved one was when they died, or my children are the age I was. I think it's an important thing that when we're being grief aware and aware of our triggers and our reminders, that's something that certainly we should be tapping into for ourselves, and also when we're providing support and care to others, being mindful of those anniversaries, those ages, those milestones that can be so key. We talk, our Pathfinders program is a 10-week program. And it is pretty structured, but it's also very flexible because we know humans are all different and one size does not fit all. But we talk about 10 milestones of healing, and we are really clear with the people that we're supporting that we often have to return to some of those milestones. So we might develop ways of coping. We might get more comfortable with sharing our story. We might, you know, fully embrace the changes in our life and explore the places where we have really struggled, the guilt or the regret or the fear or the anger. And we may have really worked hard to integrate this loss into our life, but when we hit a different developmental milestone or when we hit a different point in our life, we often have to return to that work and really focus on it again. And do it with people who can be supportive of really helping us think about where we are in our grief at this point in our life. There are no clear stages. There's no clear timeline for grief and loss. It's a normative reaction, and we work to integrate it in. But sometimes without support, whether it's friends and family or it's professional support, we can sometimes get off track as kids, as adults, as families. So I think that's a key part of the healing and the adjustment.
I've used over the years, it's interesting, you know, and I think maybe you and I have maybe had this discussion in the past, I don't know, but because we've had, I know, a number of really great conversations about a lot of things. But I always equate this to, I have certain friends in my life who maybe I was friends with in college, or I was friends back in high school or something like that. And I might not talk to them for years, but when we do reunite, it's as if we just pick up from where we left off. It's like we never weren't together, right? But we pick up from where we left off. So if it was 5 years ago that I talked with this person, we pick up from 5 years ago. And I've always thought about it that way over the years when adults would come to me and they would talk about childhood losses or childhood trauma or any of those things. What was interesting is they pick up from where they last visited with that. And if it was when they were a child, they really are. It's like they're picking up from the thoughts they had then, the emotions they had then, and they're just carrying them on. I don't know that it's resolved. I don't know that it's, I like you, I'm kind of like it's more, they just hadn't done a lot with it, and now they begin to talk about it again. So it's like going back there with an old friend, if you might say.
Well, because it's not, I mean, we're definitely, we avoid grief, right? We don't like to talk about death. It scares us as a society. It's something that we shy away from, I think, in general. And so that's part of what creates this sense of isolation and feeling very alone when you are grieving. And sometimes you do tuck it away and forget how to talk about it and how to feel those feelings. And I think, I think for us, it's preventing the complications of unaddressed grief. So addressing the grief, allowing people to, accept and experience all of the reactions and find ways to cope and adjust is what's key to having this be a part of your life and not something that defines your life. And so I think getting around that fear of talking about it and sharing that part of you with others is something that we have to do at a societal level, at a community level, at a family level, is just really having these conversations. I think that social emotional education in schools should always include talking about death and grief and loss and trauma and how kids experience adversity and how they can cope with it, because we just don't know very well as a society how to do that. And I think that there's important work being done around the field. And I think one of the things, like I said, there was so little research when I entered this field. And then there was this amazing grassroots work being done in communities and these peer support centers around the country. And it felt like there was not a bridge between the two. We had so much to learn from each other. And that's something that we've really tried to do with JAG Institute, which is also named in memory of Brian's mom, Judi Griese. But we really have worked hard to elevate the issue as a public health priority. And part of that is by drawing on the research, drawing on what we've learned from research, but drawing just as heavily on what we've learned in practice and what we've learned in the community, and really taking that collective wisdom, mixing it together, making sure we honor all of that wholly, the voices of the families that we are serving most importantly, and making sure that as we shape this field, which is still pretty nascent, there's still so little attention and funding and study of this and resources available, that we can chart a different course, that we can really embrace this, not within like that stringent medical model that says you have to only provide care to people who have a diagnostic level disorder. We should be able to provide care and support to people of all walks of life and who need it and want to talk about it more and not avoid it. It needs to be addressed.
Yeah, it's interesting. So that idea of research and evidence. So it's not just research-based practice, right? It's even practice-informed research in a way, but the two can meld. And again, it is true. In our field, there's been, for a while, there were researchers, and then there were people who were practitioners and, providing the care. And the two didn't communicate, at least not very well. So being able to meld those two. Can you talk just for a minute about some of the research, like some of the things that you've found in your research that have informed the way you do what you do?
Sure. I mean, I think what I was talking about earlier in terms about the diverse needs that exist within families who are grieving and needing to hold that and really specializing some of the interventions that we develop for those different needs is something that has informed our programs all along. We've had this continuous evaluation and research that has informed the development of not only Pathfinders, but this whole comprehensive grief care model. One of the other research tools that we developed came out of, again, necessity and practical needs assessment, really. We were looking at whether we should expand to a neighboring city in our state, and we really had no idea how many kids were bereaved in that community. My husband asked the very astute question, how many kids are we talking about? And we really didn't know, because there are not tracking systems in our country for keeping track of how many kids have had a significant bereavement experience. So out of that need came the childhood bereavement estimation model, which is a research-based tool. It's a statistical tool that uses publicly available vital statistics. But what we've been able to do is really drill down, not only looking nationally and at different ages, but in states, and even down to the county level coming soon, and being able to look at differences amongst folks so that we better understand the magnitude of the issue and its relation to other adversities and access to services and these determinants of health that can really get in the way for kids and families of receiving services. So one of the findings out of that is that 1 in 14 children will lose a parent or a sibling to death before the age of 18. 1 in 14, which is about 5 million nationally. And that number more than doubles when you look up to the age of 25, the young adults who we also serve and who are such an important age of development. So it's not an uncommon issue, right? It's prevalent, and that's just parent and sibling loss. That doesn't include other caregivers or attachment figures or best friends. So it's something that we were hoping to elevate as a priority from a policy standpoint, from a public health standpoint, but also to help kids and families feel less alone with it. That number, though, 1 in 14, means most kids probably don't know somebody in their class, right? So there is this true sense of feeling alone with it. And that's, again, where these community agencies and these programs that allow kids to connect with other kids and have that really powerful experience of not being alone with this, it comes into play.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because we, with Actively Moving Forward, are focused on that young adult, and it initially started with the college student. And we're trying to advocate with the universities and colleges, put on your application form, have you experienced a death loss, when and who died? Mm-hmm. So this way they then know, they understand the population of their students, because independent research studies suggest that it's 1 out of every 3 college student that has had a death loss. And it's more of a general, it could have been a friend, it could have been an aunt, but grief that they're dealing with after a death loss. And often we hear how students have to leave school because of a death loss, and nobody puts on these forms, why are you leaving? Why are you dropping out? Why are you suspending, your education? They'll put financial reasons, they'll put all reasons, but often to the core, it's because of a death loss, whether that impacted on the family financial ability and someone has to go back to work or can't afford to remain in college. So it's really asking the question and understanding the demographics and the need, and then being able to support it. Very, very, very great work there.
Absolutely, Fran. I agree with you wholeheartedly. Every school, every college, every primary care office, every provider should be asking these questions. And again, not be afraid to ask the questions, and then really listen to what their needs are around that, not assume anything, and then help connect them with any resources that they might need. I think that people don't fully realize, and there is quite a bit of research on this, like other adverse childhood experiences or ACEs, that kids' development can be significantly disrupted, even into adulthood, academically, socially, relationships, mental health for sure. They're at risk of developing difficulties, but also earlier health issues. Premature death is something that the research is showing. It's a health issue. It's a public health issue. It's a behavioral health issue, but it's also an academic and a social issue that has clearly not been fully addressed and acknowledged in any of our systems of care and systems of education. And that's something we're very passionate about, educating and having that advocacy around how do we make this more of a priority and something that people can actually talk about and address more fully.
Yeah.
It's interesting. The ACEs study really helped the trauma field, and to really have something to build itself on, that childhood trauma field. And I know even the creators of the study now reminisce back and think, well, you could add childhood bereavement in that, right? But it wasn't, in a way it's unfortunate it wasn't part of that study, because that could have really propelled even some of the things that we do. So
but I think we're there now. I think it's at the table now. Like we've gotten it there. This field has finally gotten it there.
Right. No, I agree 100%. So we are short on time, but before we end our time with you, our viewers quite often will like to know how they can connect with our guests. If they want to connect with you or your work or learn more about, Judi's House or the JAG Institute, how might they make that connection?
Our website is judishouse.org, JUDIS, and you can find information and connect with us there, find out about our services, about our education and resources and research. You can find me at brooke@judishouse.org is my email, or through LinkedIn. I'm always happy to connect with people around this issue. And any of our team at Judi's House and JAG Institute are available anytime.
Great. Brooke, again, we want to thank you for, first off, the work you're doing, and for being your guest here at Let's Talk Death, and for sharing your journey and the story behind your work.
Thank you so much for having me. And thank you both for your important work and contributions to this field.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks for those who are joining us for this episode of Let's Talk Death. If you would like to learn more about Heal Grief, please visit us at healgrief.org. At healgrief.org, you can learn more about all of the programs and resources at Heal Grief, including our national network of support for grieving young adults called Actively Moving Forward.
Make sure to sign up on healgrief.org to receive our newsletter for links to future episodes of Let's Talk Death.
And again, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Let's Talk Death.